Good morning. Several people have asked me during the course of the cruise how come my wife isn't with me. She was actually on this ship, the first little short 2-day cruise that we did out to the Bahamas back in mid-October, but her passion is horses, and that was my wife riding. There you see her again. What I'm going to do today is a little bit different from any of the other lectures. There is a theme to this particular talk, and it's transportation. And I'm going to talk about transportation in Latin America that I have seen over the last 5 decades, or actually during the last 57 years. I'm not going to start out with big airplanes. You'll all probably be on a big airplane tomorrow. I'm not going to talk about modern shipping like cruise ships. I'm going to start out with rather less sophisticated means of transportation, essentially dugout canoes. And this is in the Amazon. Here's another one of dugout canoe. This was in Guayaquil, Ecuador. And this is another one in the Amazon area. I have to apologize always on this particular photo. It's a little bit out of focus. I was in a dugout canoe, and it was shaky, and it's a telephoto shot. It was a little hard to take. But I like to point out a couple of things in this particular picture. First thing is what's called the freeboard, the distance between the water line and the side of the boat. And that freeboard is about 3 or 4 inches there, which means if the boat tips a little bit, they're going to get water inside. The other thing I like to point out is the number of people in this particular boat. There's a guy up front, and a little girl, and a woman. There's a kid hidden behind these packages there, and 2 adults there in the back, and the dog up front. These things are frequently overloaded. We actually had ridden this one across a river. It's the only way to get across a river in coastal Honduras. And I took this picture as it was loading up to go back across that particular river. Here's a guy working on making a dugout canoe in the Amazon area. And there's another one that was under construction, and here's one in coastal Honduras that was just about finished. Big canoes like this one in the Caribbean side of Central America were actually being used at the time that Columbus and the early Spanish explorers were in the Caribbean. We know that Cortez, for example, in going from Cuba over to Yucatan, saw dugout canoes, big dugout canoes like this. And I don't want to suggest that there are some very poor boats in the Amazon. Any of you want to do a 20-day cruise on the Amazon in a boat like this? You could. It's very possible to do that. I've spent a lot of time in Peru, and particularly the coastal region, the north coastal region of Peru. That area is a desert. The desert stretches from the Ecuadorian-Peruvian border all the way down to north-central Chile, a little to the north of Santiago. And there was, in Aboriginal times, very little wood available. How do you make a boat if you don't have much wood? One thing you can do is make a raft, particularly up near Ecuador. There are trees that actually float down that are driftwood. This is little rafts that are being used to go out to the fishing boats there that you see off the top of the picture. And there's a close-up on them. Rafts like this have been made in this area for literally thousands of years. Most of the pictures that I'm going to show you today are ones that I took, and I'll point out one I did not take the picture, but I did not take this one. I wasn't there in 1894. This was done by a German ethnographer by the name of Enrique Bruning. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Thor Heyerdahl and Kon-Tiki in the late 1940s, sailing from Peru out to the islands in the Pacific on a raft. And that kind of raft that he built, the Kon-Tiki raft, was something that had been used in this area for, again, literally thousands of years. We know at the time of the Spanish conquest of Peru that rafts like this were sailing from coastal Peru up to west coast of Mexico. There are other parts of the coast of Peru where it is extremely dry and there is no wood, at least originally. How do you make a boat to go fishing if you don't have wood? The waters off the coast of Peru are one of the richest waters in the world for fishing, but what do you make? What you do is you make a raft or a boat out of reeds. Again, this is a picture, one of the earliest ones I'll show you from back when I was there first time in 1967. Here's again a Bruning picture from 1908, same spot. And here's one by Hiram Bingham in 1911 from essentially same area. The boats there were made out of reeds. I've lived in the little town of Huanchaco several different times. Spent the summer there in 74 and 76 and 1980. And here are fishermen drying reeds on the coastal desert. There are reeds in areas just back from the beach, and they dry them out in the desert and then wrap them up and make a boat. You can see it close up there. It is just a bunch of reeds tied together. Problem with a boat like this is that the reeds absorb water, and as you go sailing out into the water fishing, they gradually sink. They're good for about 4 hours. If you go there today, and we do have a stop in this area on some voyages in Trujillo, Peru, and there is a shore excursion that goes out to Huanchaco. Many people go out there and see these things, and they're not quite the same as they used to be. Here's a more recent photo, and I'm not sure if you can see what's going on here, but there's a better photo. They now wrap styrofoam with the reeds, and therefore they don't sink in 4 hours. Now, one time when we were living there in 1980, we hired a guy to make one of these things for us. And this is the guy there with our boat. In Peru, we talk about Peruvian time. And he said he was going to come over about 11 o'clock and make us a boat. And I was going to go over and take the whole sequence of pictures of him making the boat. So I figured, well, Peruvian time, that means if I go over sometime afternoon, he will probably just be starting. I got there a little before noon, and he was just finishing. That's the only picture I have of him making our boat. But there he is with our finished boat. Cost us $17. And here's some guys fishing on these. They can ride them like a little horse. In fact, that's the name in Peru, is Caballito de Totora, little horse of Totora reed. Or sometimes they kneel on them. And when they're dry, they're fairly light. After they've soaked up water, obviously it takes several men to just drag it up onto the beach. But when it's dry, it's pretty light. And here's a more recent picture I took out the window from a hotel. When I first went to this town in 1966, it was a small little fishing village. Now more recently, it has high-rise hotels and condos and everything. It's really developed as a tourist center. Now we're going to be on land, and that's the Pan American Highway 40 years ago. It was a two-lane road that stretched all the way from Alaska to southern Argentina. I was going through the coastal desert, and it used to be a pretty narrow road. Now, in Peru at least, it's a four-lane divided highway in most areas. Some places the road was just about covered with sand, like there, and some places it was still a dirt road back in the 70s and 80s. Today it's now a paved road. This is in the south coast of Peru, but still sand is pretty much trying to cover over it. There will be drifting sand dunes on the road itself. Here we're in far southern South America, in Chile. I was on my way to a national park called the Torres del Paine National Park, which is just an absolutely fantastic place. I talk about it in lectures that I do around the Horn. And you can see it's a dirt road. Here's an old picture, again, more than 50 years ago, up in the mountains in north part of Peru, with the road just kind of twisting through the valley there. Or on this one, we're in Bolivia. That's the Pan American Highway, and it's coming in from the left, bottom left, and it goes across, and then it makes a sharp turn. It's out of the picture, comes down, makes another sharp turn, goes off. It's actually heading off towards that town in the far distance there. What I want to point out is notice all the guardrails and the big signs that say sharp turn ahead. Nothing like that. Here we were driving along, a landslide has come down, covered the road, and they've simply moved the road around the landslide. Or here we were headed off to an archaeological site that I wanted to visit. The road came to an end, and at that point we started walking. Literally millions of people around the world live beyond the end of the road. The roads simply don't go everywhere you want to go. This is a pose picture. That's me driving there. You might notice sometimes that there's a couple different vehicles in here. 3 different times I've had a truck in Peru that we've driven down from the U.S. to Peru. So that's me driving. We hit a real dusty spot in Ecuador, and I told my wife, why don't you get out and stand there, take a picture of me. I'll back up a ways, and I'll come through, and we'll show everybody how dusty it is. Of course, she got completely covered by dust. What happens when 2 trucks meet on a fairly narrow mountain road? Like that. Or like this. This is another truck I had. Notice the tire there on the passenger side. It is right on the edge. The truck on the right there that was going past wasn't too bad. I had pulled in the mirror on the driver's side, but the bus that was in front of that truck just barely scraped by. Or here, we were driving up in the mountains east of Lima, and these trucks came. It was a situation where the road was quite narrow, and vehicles were coming from both directions, and they tried to get past, and they could not get past. There was no room. And so then the drivers got out and started arguing as to who is the one that's going to back up. And there were other vehicles behind both trucks. Fortunately for us, we were in the vehicle behind the one on the right, and in the car behind us there was a policeman. So he got out and arbitrated, and the truck there on the left, El Joven, was the one that got to back up, and we were the ones that got to go forward. Here was a case where we were in a small town up in the mountains, and there was a pickup truck that was loading bags of potatoes. And we simply had to sit there, and we sat for over an hour while they finished loading the potatoes. There was no way to get around it. Or here, the different types of vehicles on the road: bicycle, horse-drawn, car, truck, whatever. Or here, tractor, car, truck. It's the mix of vehicles on some of these roads that's bad. Or animals on the road. Lots and lots of animals on the road. This is actually a telephoto shot. The truck in the distance there is much closer than it looks. The telephoto compresses the distance, but still, you've got animals on the road. And here's a little video. And I was driving by myself. I was actually coming back from Torres de Paine National Park by myself. A stretch of paved road, and there were these cows on the road. Now, I was driving a stick shift car, so while I'm videoing here, I'm also steering and having to shift. But I'm able to get past here. We get Bossy out of the way, and I can accelerate, shift up. Now, there's sound, but there's not any noise because I've got the window rolled down and the radio's off. So you're not hearing very much. So we've been seeing kind of individual cows in my way, but now there's a whole bunch. So I have to come to a complete stop, which is advantageous because now I can roll down the window. And so now we have sound. There are a couple of guys here. They're what are called in Chile huasos. In Argentina, they would be gauchos. But they were herding the cows along. Here we are in the Pan American Highway in Bolivia back over 50 years ago, and we were driving along and we came to this river that was flooding across, and the question is, how deep is that water? Do I want to drive through it? And the answer was, no, I don't want to drive through it. It could be 6 feet deep or whatever. So I sat there, and a bunch of other guys stopped. There were several of us. And then this truck came from the other direction, and he drove across it. He knew how deep it was. As soon as he came across, we all jumped in our cars and drove across. But nobody wanted to be the first one to give it a try. There's some nice bridges. Not too bad. That one's not too bad. That one's not too bad. Somebody else was driving here, my truck, but I got out to take the picture because I figured if it collapses while we drive across, I'll get an action shot. Made it across. When you can get underneath the bridge and you look up and see daylight between the boards, you begin to wonder. I'm driving there. Somebody else took this picture. That's the worst bridge I ever went across. And we were going up to a particular spot, and we had to come back down the same road and drive across that same bridge again. Here's a bridge that I wanted to go across. I needed to go across. We wanted to get to the other side, look at an archaeological site. But I looked at that and said, no, I think we're going to start walking right here. Here's a bridge of the style that the Incas made. It goes back thousands of years or so. My friend, the late Paul Osa there on it 50 years ago. There's Paul a little bit closer. And the style of construction there was something goes back to the Incas. Here's a suspension bridge. The Incas actually made suspension bridges with grass ropes. And there's the same bridge from another angle. This is a bridge that Paul Osa and I stopped to look at, and we got out on it. We got out here in the middle. These are a lot of fun because you can get them swaying back and forth, left and right, and you can also get them swaying up and down. And we got this one swaying in two different directions at the same time, testing out your theories of harmonics and physics and everything. And then we noticed the sticks that we were standing on started to fall off, and we realized this is about the dumbest thing that two PhD candidates have ever done. There's me going across a bridge that was nothing more than two logs with some small sticks tying them together. We had to go across this one. Somebody else obviously took the picture. When we went back, we took off our boots, rolled up our pants, and waded across the stream. We did not try to go across that one. I don't want to give you the impression that every bridge is bad. This is a bridge across the Paraná River in the northern part of Argentina. Now we're going to look at things going on land. Do you ever see things like this as you drive around California or New York or wherever? Guys riding on the back of a truck like that? Or how about me on the top of a truck? We were hiking one time for about 3 weeks up in the Peruvian Andes, and whenever we could, we hitched a ride, and if we rode on the top of a truck, that's where we rode. But, scenes like this are fairly common. When you see something like that, when you see a sign that says caution, cuidado, are you cautious? Perhaps if you see a few crosses next to it, which indicates where somebody died, you might be a little bit more cautious. Lots of crosses. Lots and lots of crosses. Lots of accidents. I used to drive a lot from Trujillo down to Lima, which is 300 miles or so on the Pan American Highway, and very seldom did we make that entire trip without seeing at least one accident. Lots and lots of accidents. Here's a case where a truck has turned over. I don't know how or why. It seemed to be just one vehicle. And there's a couple guys there that are starting to unload the truck. They are going to have to figure out how to get that truck back on its wheels and get going again. AAA does not come out this far. Here's a truck that obviously has gone off the road. There's a sign on the truck. It says, "God is my guide." God took a day off one day, and that's the result. Here's bus number 1 and bus number 2. Two buses hit head on. Here's one time we were driving. We were in the Land Cruiser there in the background, and we got to a point where this truck was in front of us, blocking the road. His springs had broken on one side in the back, and the body of the truck was resting on the tire. They did not have a jack. We had a jack, so we got out our jack. We jacked the truck up a little bit. They put a rock between the axle and the frame so that they could move it, because the body wasn't resting on the tires anymore. They could move it out of the way, and we could then get by. We came back down the same road several hours later. We never saw the truck again. I don't know where they went. I would not have driven 50 feet with a rock between my axle and my frame. Here's one time back in 1968, we were going and the axle broke. One of the back axles on this Land Rover broke, and we took the broken axle out, put the tire back on, and it became a front-wheel drive Land Rover. Made it home. Here's a case where there's a truck stopped there. He's got a broken axle. There are some people camped over here on the side in the shadow, and what they were doing is they have sent somebody off to get the part to fix it, and it may take them a week or something for somebody to go find a part and buy it and bring it back and fix it. You have to be able to fix your own vehicle if you're traveling way, way up in the mountains. And on that yellow truck, here's me. A nut had come off the carburetor, had gone through the valve and welded itself onto the piston. And that's me fixing the head on the motor. I had taken the motor apart to scrape the nut off the piston and the valves. I used to be a mechanic back for the pre-college days, the pre-university days. This is called a control. It's simply a bar across the road, and you have to stop and check in with the police. And these used to be very, very common throughout Latin America. Here's another one. There's a bar across the road. You get out. Sometimes you have to pay a little fee, but they check over your paperwork and so forth. There's one that says stop control. Or here, this is in Argentina, and that's one of the fanciest controls I've ever seen. Big two-story concrete building. This is in the line between two Argentina states. And there was a policeman sitting out there by the side of the road. He's flagging everybody down. He checked over our paperwork. Everything was fine. It's a rental car. Were we wearing our seatbelts? Yes. Did we have our headlights on? Yes. Did we have a fire extinguisher? Yes. Did we have a little red triangle in case we had a flat tire? No. That's me paying my fine because we didn't have a little red triangle. While I'm standing there paying the fine, a guy pulls up behind me, jumps out, and comes over and stands in line behind me. He hasn't even talked to the policeman. And I said, what are you doing? You haven't talked to the policeman. He said, it doesn't matter. You have to pay it. They'll find something. Saves time to just go up and pay the fine. Here's Baja California 55 years ago, and we were getting gasoline out of that old gas pump. Here's a gasoline station in Peru. Notice that the pump is that one back over there on the back. I don't know if any of you can read it, but that is 66 octane gas. Any of you use 66 octane in your car? Not real good stuff. Here's a more modern gas station in Paraguay. What's this? Anybody tell me what this is? What is it? Hotel? No, not really. I do not ask tough questions. This is, there's no test at the end of the lecture. What are those things out there in front? Trucks. What verb describes those trucks? They're stopped. This is a truck stop. Way out in the boonies. You can be as far out as you can imagine, and somebody will be providing services. Gasoline, in this case, siphoned out of 55-gallon drums, a little bit of food or whatever. Here's some Colombian truck drivers on the side of the road getting their morning coffee. There's a guy with his morning coffee. I said one time we were hiking for 3 weeks up in the Peruvian mountains. We came to this particular spot. We'd been hiking for a day and a half or 2 days at this point, and it was not a truck stop. There's no trucks parked out in front, but there was a horse. This is a horse stop. And things like Coke were available. They even had Coca-Cola in addition to the Coke. Here we are walking. Lots of people end up walking. They live beyond the end of the road. And if you look at the terrain there, it's pretty rough terrain. Here, you can carry a lot of stuff if you're walking. On this picture, I'm up on a hill looking down, and it's fairly obvious why there is not any motorized vehicles on that road. It is a small little path, and what we see are some people walking and some donkeys. Or here, if you look at the terrain in the background, this is very rough terrain. We were walking. There's no road here, and you end up either riding or walking. But you can carry a lot of cargo on animals. These are bags of potatoes on some donkeys. Or here, bags of potatoes on donkeys. I might also point out there are 5 people in this picture, 4 female, adult females to a certain extent, and 1 young man. And who gets to ride? The young man. It is kind of sexist. Here, straw, or here a bag of corn being tied onto the animal. What are these? Llamas? No, they're not alpacas. They're not llamas. What is a llama? Does anybody know what a llama is? Anybody know what a llama is? Spelled L-A-M-A. A Tibetan priest. L-A-M-A, lama. These animals are llamas. Double L-A-M-A. In Spanish, a double L is a Y sound, so those are llamas. Anybody know what it is when you spell it with 3 L's? 3 L's. L-L-L-A-M-A. It's not misspelled. No. I know there's at least 1 or 2 people here from Boston. What is it in Boston? It's a bad fire. Haven't you ever heard of a triple llama? Okay. I used to think that llamas were no longer used as pack animals. Back when I was in Peru in the 60s and 70s, in the 80s we started traveling to a valley in the far southern highlands called the Colca Valley, and in that area, real remote area, they still use llama pack trains. There's the animal. Actually, the the zoological name for it is with 1 L. Llama glama is the Latin name for llamas. And they can carry a small pack, not a real heavy pack, maybe 100 pounds or so, 50 kilos. Here's an old woodcut drawing from the early 1600s of showing somebody putting a pack on a llama. When they go on a pack train, every time they go, the animal gets a piece of yarn sewn through its ear. This is a rookie llama. This one has done probably a few more pack trains. And here's King Llama, the most famous, most experienced llama of them all. One step up from that would be some motorized or wheeled vehicle, bicycle, or a cart, a little what they call a tricycle, or a hand cart. Here one from last year on Oceania, going through the Caribbean. An animal-drawn vehicle, ox cart. Again, this is almost 40 years ago. But in recent years, I've been in southern Chile many times, and there are still many areas where ox carts are still found. I've taken pictures of them as recently as a year ago, 2 years ago. Horse-drawn carts. This is near downtown Santiago, Chile, horse-drawn cart. Over there in Coquimbo a couple years ago. That's one of our stops when we were sailing along the coast of Chile. Or motorized, typically these little motorized tricycles, and some of them can be fairly fancy. I always tell people, if you're traveling in the third world and you see these things, do not ride on them. They are about the most dangerous thing that you can imagine. Preferably, you would be better off riding a motorcycle with a couple of your friends. Many of your friends. My own personal record is seeing 5 people on a motorcycle. Or you can ride in the back of a pickup truck. This was, again, actually those people, not in this case, not in that picture, but on one shore excursion on Marina in Mazatlan, the shore excursion involved riding in pickup trucks like that. Or you can ride on top of a minivan. I mean, it was crowded when we went up to Antigua, and the bus that I was on, I probably would have preferred riding on the roof if they had offered that. Here's an old bus. This is in Lima. They used to have buses like that. Here, this is a bus that's traveling between a couple of cities. It has a sign there that tells you what cities it runs between, the name of the company there. Up on the top it says it's a luxury bus, Servicio de Lujo, and it says here that this is a 22 PSJ, 22 pasajeros, 22 passenger bus. Here's one, the sign says it's a 32 passenger bus, running between Lima and Huancayo and so forth. This one, I don't know if you can see it, it says it's a 28 passenger bus. I rode this bus one time for 36 hours, Huancayo, from Cusco to Huancayo. And at the time we took this picture, we stopped for breakfast and I got out and took this picture. I counted the people getting off this bus. And there were people seated in the seats. The bus driver had a big wide seat and he had two young ladies seated on either side of him. There were people standing between the last row of seats and the back wall of the bus. There were people seated in the aisles. There were people on the roof. But I will always remember it because the capacity was 28 and we had 57. We had one more than double. Here you might notice some people riding on the top of the bus. Or this bus, we faked ourselves out that one time. We were able to buy the ticket for this particular bus about 3 or 4 days in advance. And so we could choose our seats. And we chose the seats right next to the driver, which I thought, well, that'll be great. We'll be able to see out the front. Turned out that was a folding seat. Anytime anybody got out or got on, we had to stand up and fold the seat. It also turned out there was no exhaust on this bus, so that the exhaust was coming right up where we were seated. That thing that's hanging down from the driver's door there, that's the door lock. You had to wrap a cloth around the door to keep it closed. And I don't want to give you the impression that every bus is old. There are some nice new ones. We've ridden on some nice new ones on this trip. Here's an electric bus. Couple of weeks I'll be down in Valparaiso in Chile, and this is an electric bus from 40 years ago, or almost 40 years ago. You might think that's gone. Here's a picture, same type of bus a few years ago, and I've been in Valparaiso several times in the last couple of years, and these buses are still running. They still have electric buses from the 1940s and 50s running. There are some nice subways in a few places. This is an old one in Argentina, but here's a nice new one in Buenos Aires. Several of the cities have some very nice new subway systems, mass transit systems. This is a little bit different. This is a combination of a truck and a bus. At the front, it has a couple of rows of seats, and in the back, it carries cargo. So this one has a sign that says 15 PSJ, 15 passenger. Don't you believe it. If you can't get 40 or 50 people onto this bus truck, you haven't even tried. This one, I think, had 3 rows of seats. That one is the original double cab pickup truck, 2 rows of seats. But you can get a lot of people into the back of a truck, like that. Or here, people are actually riding on bananas. There's a better view of it. This truck came up and stopped on the plaza in Ollantaytambo. That's the town near Cusco that we've had the videos on in previous lectures. And I started to count the people getting off the bus, or off the truck. I lost count at 70-some, and it was not empty at that point. So they had an awful lot of people on that particular one. What do you need to have a vehicle? You need 2 things, steering and a gas pedal. Pretty much anything else is going to be optional. Brakes, windshield, all that other stuff, not really needed. I like to think if this guy could be caught in California, the California Highway Patrol could balance the state budget with 1 set of fines on a guy like that. And again, I don't want to give you the impression that every vehicle is terrible or old. This is a fairly new truck in Peru in those days, and there are some very nice new ones today. You might also notice the truck has a name on it, simple name, Luis Miguel, probably the name of the owner and or the driver of the truck, or maybe one of his kids. Back when I was doing an archaeology project in Peru in 76 and 77, I knew that I was going to be there for a long time. I thought, I'm interested in these names. Why do trucks have various names? I'll write down the name when I see them, and we'll start writing things down. Before I did that, I did some research, and I found that around the world, there were scholars that were interested in boat names in Nigeria, or truck names in Afghanistan, or truck names in Mexico and stuff. At that point in time, I didn't know that anybody had ever done anything in Peru. So I started to write them down, but we also decided to do it systematically. So we wrote down other information like the color and the make and the license number and stuff, so we could see the same, if we ever saw the same truck again. Here's a guy that's actually painting the name on. It's a simple name. It's called Don Pedro Julian, and that is the driver, owner of the truck. His name is Don Pedro Julian. And as I went along, I gathered more and more. When I started the project in 76, 77, it was just something to occupy my time as we were driving around. I ended up doing it for 10 years. And in that time, I found that there was a fellow from UC Irvine in California, University of California, Irvine, who had done a doctoral dissertation on the subject of truck names in Peru. His sample was something like 300 trucks. At the point in time I found his, I had a couple thousand. And by the time I finished, I had over 10,000. But we kept doing it. It was just something to occupy as we were doing other work. This is a simple name, Johnny. You see a name like that, Julio Cesar. It could be the name of the driver. It could be the name of the owner. It could be from history. We had a category, as we started to identify our names, we had a category of names from world history. And it could be the Roman general, Julio Cesar. But it could also be from popular culture. At that point in time, the most important Peruvian soccer player on the national team was Julio Cesar Uribe. And it could be from that. So unless you interviewed the driver, you really wouldn't know why did they choose that particular name. We interviewed over 300 drivers in the course of the study. This is sort of a friendly name, the friend, or one more friend. A name like that, probably from world history, Attila. This one, it could be the name of the last name of the owner, Rommel, but when you see the thing down on the bumper there, the Zorro del Desierto, the Desert Fox, it's clearly a German World War II name. In sample size of over 10,000, we had a fair number of German World War II references. We only had a couple of Allied references. We had Churchill, we had Roosevelt, but we had a lot of different German World War II names. Sometimes a name was hard to figure out. The picaflor, El Picaflor. Anybody know what a picaflor is? Oops, I didn't hear that. What did they say? A hummingbird, a hummingbird. Why do you name a truck the hummingbird? One of our categories was botanical and zoological, and in that category, the largest number were feline names, lion, tiger, jaguar, things like that. But picaflor was a fairly common one. Here's another one, the northern picaflor, El Picaflor norteño. And it was hard to figure out why that was. I have a Peruvian friend that helps me out on some of this sort of thing, and we talked about it a lot. It turns out that that's a very sexual image. You might not think of a hummingbird as a sexual image, but if you think about it, what do hummingbirds do? They flit from flower to flower, fertilizing as they go. What do truck drivers do? They drive from town to town, fertilizing as they go. And I know that you young ladies are probably going to be interested in this, but he thinks he is about the greatest gift to women that you could possibly imagine. He's the northern hummingbird. Here's another word, the picaflor from the town of Carhuas, the Carhuasino picaflor. I had a hard time figuring this one out. I saw a lot of trucks, M1, M2, M3. We couldn't figure it out. And then finally I saw that it was a logo from a chicken feed company. Here's one that is from a tea company, or here from a beer company. Actually, again, our study was done between 76 and 85. And in that period, I was in Peru 3 different times for a year or more, and spent a lot of time in Peru. I've never, since 85, I've never spent more than 3 or 4 or 5 weeks at a time in Peru. But if you go to Peru today, the name that you'll see most often on a truck will be a company name. Most trucks are now owned by big companies, not by the owner-driver. Here's a name that's kind of dangerous, venomous. Some are from popular culture. This is from the television program or movie, The Fugitive. Sometimes you don't even have to see the name to know what the name is going to be. Batman was actually a fairly common name. We had a number of ones of that, or things like Robin Hood. These are all from popular culture. About 1/3 of our names were religious. Simple religious names like Jesus the Savior or Noah's Ark. Many of them were saints' names. This is the Archangel St. Michael. Peru has 4 saints that have lived in Peru, become saints. And of those, the most popular is San Martin de Porres. The guy that did his doctoral dissertation at UC Irvine on a sample size of 300 some said that no truck has the same name. I had over 100 examples of San Martin de Porres. Very, very popular name. The single most popular name we had was Señor de los Milagros. It refers to an image of Christ painted on a church in Lima. There was an earthquake, the church fell down, the painted image survived, and it is now the single most important religious festival. Every October in Lima, there is a major Señor de los Milagros celebration, and we had way, way over 100 examples of Señor de los Milagros. I have two favorite names. I have no idea why somebody named their truck Mr. Cat, even with the period after Mr. And why Dog's Life, with the apostrophe there. I have no idea why they use that name. If you've enjoyed my lectures, how about joining me on a future Oceania cruise? In March and April, I'll be going from Rio de Janeiro to Miami on Marina. Somebody is going to be there? Yes, a couple people. And a year from now, I'm going to go from Lisbon to Miami, and then we do a short Eastern Caribbean cruise on Marina, and then it comes back to Miami, and we go Miami to Lima in November, a year from now. Those are my next ones. I'm actually now booked up something like 22, 23 months ahead. I'll be on Marina in 2025. I always like to thank the theater staff. These guys have done a wonderful job. We've had no technical problems. Actually, we had a little bit of technical problem the very first lecture back in mid-October, but we solved it, and we've never had a problem since then. They've just been absolutely wonderful. Hopefully you'll have a safe trip home, and thanks a lot for joining me.